I was excited to finally take a break from the city and head to the cabin deep in the woods. I had heard great things about the place, and I couldn't wait to spend the weekend in the peaceful, secluded spot. My friends and I had rented the cabin for the weekend, and we were determined to make the most of it. We arrived late in the evening after a long drive. The cabin was located in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by dense forest, and it was completely isolated from civilization. We were looking forward to some much-needed peace and quiet. As the night went on, strange things began to happen. We heard strange noises outside, like something was scratching at the windows. We brushed it off as animals and went to bed, but I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that something was wrong. The next morning, we woke up to find strange markings on the windows. They looked like claw marks, as if something had tried to get in. We were all a little uneasy, but decided to go for a hike to clear our minds. As we were walking, we stumbled upon a small, abandoned cabin. It was clear that it had been untouched for years. We decided to take a look inside, but as soon as we entered, we all felt a chill run down our spines. The cabin was dusty and musty, but something about it felt off. We couldn't put our finger on it, but we all felt a sense of unease. We quickly left the cabin and continued our hike. As we walked, we noticed that the forest around us seemed to grow darker and more sinister. The further we walked, the more certain we became that something was tracking us. We could hear the rustling of bushes and twigs snapping as if something was following us. We tried to ignore it and focus on our hike, but the feeling of being watched was becoming more and more intense. We got back to our cabin and locked the doors, but the strange noises continued. We could hear something scratching at the windows and doors, trying to get in. We were terrified, but we didn't know what to do. We decided to stay together in one room and keep the lights on for the rest of the night, but it was clear that we wouldn't be able to sleep. The rest of the night was a blur. We heard strange noises outside the cabin, like something was walking around and scratching at the walls. We could hear whatever was outside getting closer and closer until it finally stopped. In the morning, we packed up and left as fast as we could. We didn't even stop to eat breakfast. We were all too scared to stay any longer. As we were about to leave, we saw some footprints outside the cabin, unlike any animal footprints we have ever seen. They had a human-like shape, but each of their toes had a very long claw. We knew we had to get out of there as fast as possible. We never spoke of that night again, but we all knew that something was out there, something that we never wanted to encounter again. We got back to the city and we never went back to the cabin. And I never forgot the eerie feeling of being followed, tracked, and watched. The experience in that cabin still haunts me to this day. I have always loved visiting the great outdoors and spending time in the wilderness. But my most recent trip to a remote cabin deep in the woods will haunt me forever. I had rented the cabin for a week with a few friends, excited to escape from the city and spend some time in nature. But as soon as we arrived, something felt off. The cabin was old and run down, and there were strange markings on the walls that made me feel uneasy. We decided to go for a walk in the woods, but within minutes, we got lost. The trees seemed to be closing in on us, and the path we were following disappeared. It was getting darker by the minute, and I could feel my heart racing with fear. Suddenly, we heard a howl in the distance. It was a bone-chilling sound that I had never heard before. We knew we needed to get back to the cabin as soon as possible, but we couldn't find our way back. When we finally stumbled upon the cabin, we found the door had been broken open. We cautiously entered, expecting the worst. But there was no one inside, just broken furniture, and a strange smell that made us feel sick. At night, we barricaded the door and tried to get some sleep, but strange noises kept us awake. It sounded like someone, or something, was walking around the cabin. We were too scared to leave our beds. The next morning, we decided to leave the cabin and go for help. But as soon as we stepped outside, we realized that the woods had changed. The trees were twisted and distorted, and the sky was a sickly shade of green. We started walking, but the further we went, the more disorienting it became. The trees seemed to be moving, and the ground was shifting beneath our feet. We stumbled upon a clearing and saw a figure in the distance, beckoning us towards them. We ran towards the figure, hoping it was someone who could help us. But as we got closer, we realized it was an old man with a twisted, sinister smile. He told us that we were in his world now, and we would never be able to leave. We tried to run, but the old man was too fast. He grabbed us and pulled us into the darkness, and that was the last I remember. When I woke up, I was in a strange room. The old man was there, and he told me that I was his prisoner. He said that he would use me for his experiments and that I would never be able to leave. I was there for what felt like an eternity, subjected to his twisted experiments. I still remember the terror I felt when the twisted old man locked us inside the cabin in the woods. My friends and I were trapped, with no escape in sight. But then, a stroke of luck came our way. The old man left the cabin, and I saw my chance to escape. I quickly made my way to a small window near the ceiling and managed to pry it open. With all my strength, I hoisted myself up and wriggled my way through the opening. I was finally free from that nightmare. As I stumbled through the woods, my heart was pounding with fear and relief. I had escaped that terrible place and was finally on my way back to safety. I couldn't believe that I was finally free from that haunted cabin. But my journey wasn't over yet. I still had to make my way out of the dense forest and back to civilization. The thought of what could have happened if I had stayed in that cabin still sends shivers down my spine. When I finally emerged from the woods, I was greeted by a group of search and rescue workers who had been looking for us. They were amazed to see that I had managed to escape the cabin on my own. My friends and I were reunited, and we all went to the hospital to be checked over. We were physically unharmed, but the emotional scars from our experience would take much longer to heal. We tried to piece together what had happened that day, but there were still so many unanswered questions. We couldn't understand how the cabin had vanished from the map and why the old man had locked us inside. And the scariest part is that, till this day, the old man has never been caught. There's something deep inside telling me that the old man is not human. Despite the fear and uncertainty, I was grateful to be alive and to have escaped the horrors of that cabin. I knew that I would never forget what happened that day, but I hoped that in time, the memory of it would fade. And while I can never erase that terrible experience from my mind, I take solace in the fact that I was able to escape. I had faced my fear and come out on the other side. I was a survivor, and that was something to be proud of. I was staying in a small cabin deep in the woods with a few of my friends. The cabin was situated in the heart of the forest, surrounded by tall trees in complete silence. We were there to get away from the chaos of the city and to spend some quality time in nature. However, what started out as a peaceful escape quickly turned into a nightmare. It was in the middle of the night when we heard a loud knocking at the door. I went to answer it, and I was taken aback by what I saw. There was a young woman standing outside. Her face was a mask of desperation and loneliness. She told us that she had been coming to our cabin every night to see if we were having a party because she was so desperately lonely. At first, we were hesitant to let her in, but something in her eyes made me feel sorry for her, and I invited her in. She told us stories of her life in the cabin in the woods, and we all listened intently. However, as the night went on, we started to feel uncomfortable. Her story seemed exaggerated and far-fetched, and she mentioned strange things that lived in the woods that scared her. Just as she was about to leave, she turned to us and said, "Be careful. It's dangerous in the woods at night." And with that, she was gone. As the night went on, strange things started to happen. We heard creaks and whispers coming from outside, and every time we looked out the window, we saw only darkness. My friends and I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, but it only seemed to grow stronger. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, there was another knock at the door. I hesitated before opening it, and what I saw made me wish I never had. The young woman had returned, but she was no longer the beautiful, lonely figure we had seen earlier. Her face was now a rotten, decomposing visage, and her eyes were filled with a dark, malevolent energy. She tried to force her way into the cabin, and we were forced to fight her off. Her touch was cold, and when I looked into her eyes, I saw only death. We managed to push her out, but as she was leaving, she let out a cackling laugh that echoed in my mind to this day. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, too scared to move. The next morning, we packed our things and left the cabin as quickly as possible. I can still hear the young woman's laugh, and I know that I will never forget what happened in that cabin in the woods.